Okay, and this is the last part, the fifth part, and I want to start it off with a quote. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Let me say that again. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Means when you don't understand it, it's magic to you until it's explained. And then it's no longer magic. It's just reality. It's possible. That's an Arthur C. Clarke quote. And so, with that understanding, with that little kind of intro here, we're going to talk about sorcery and the magic of the witches within this little reality. And so they call them sorceresses. They don't call them witches. The witches is a slang that's provided to them by the public, gratefully. But the powers, so there is magic. Magic exists, and it's in all sorts of forms. But they do have sorcerers, like for example, Ozma Tipitarius was turned into a boy through some kind of magicking by a sorcerer. So there's various levels, but for the most part, when the girls arrive at Shiz, they are informed or kind of the knowledge that sorcery is kind of outdated. It's, some of them even go, that's just like pseudoscience. It's not real. It's hokey. But it is a course, and Madam Morrible is the instructor. And it is something that they are eventually kind of ushered into by her in order to kind of manipulate them. And so you see different forms of magic being performed, and it's pedestrian magic. So you've got, just like run-of-the-mill telekinesis, transmutation, turning water to wine, iron to gold. And then biological grafting, which we see later on with the wings of the flying monkeys. But also there's some experiments that were happening with this biological like black thing that made these antlers come to life and try to kill Fiyero when he first arrived in class. And that was his introduction of him like pissing himself and like screaming in terror. Not very manly, right? Not like the play. There's different forms of magic that are just kind of accepted as normal. But then there's this unique talent that first manifests itself within Glinda, at least to other people's knowledge. But I would argue throughout the book, Elphaba had been the first to manifest it, but she didn't know what it means. And I'll talk about that in a second. But with Galinda, it starts with her telling a tall tale in order to try to get out of being a roommate with Elphaba, that Amma Clutch, her chaperone, is losing her mind after like an accident, skiing accident or something. She fell off a cliff, who knows. But because of this, she has, issues with her mind where she forgets that something is living. So, this poor puppy behind me, he's snoring. She would forget he's a living thing and maybe, pick him up and throw him in the trash. Or ignore a bookshelf that fell on a boy who's screaming for screaming bloody murder because he's being crushed. And then she turns and has a conversation with a hat because she thinks it's alive. And this is just a story that Glinda makes up because who's going to be able to prove it? She's like, oh, you can't trust her with these other girls. It's dangerous. But she can stay with me. It's fine. But that's why I need a room to myself. And so Madam Morrible, being the shrewd, discerning woman that she was, goes, likely story, but I'll go with it. But you're going to regret that. And so it's arguable whether or not that tall tale that Glinda proclaimed is actually, was her indirectly, subconsciously manifesting that reality. Madame Morrible actually like says that it's almost like a premonition, like she knew it would happen, and so she just kind of like accidentally said it because she saw it and it was the first thing that came to her mind because she was seeing the future. I would actually argue, because of other things that happen, like with Elphaba, that their power is more kind of like the power of persuasion or suggestion. They're convincing themselves, or they hear something that somebody says that they're like, oh, I wonder if that's real, and then their innate power just makes it happen. So this persuasive, suggestive, premonitive power is what they have. And we also see, at least in the play, Nessa Rose has that same power. Because the magic she does in Munchkin Land to Nick Chopper, his axe, this is run-of-the-mill curse. This isn't like she didn't have any like crazy power. But in the play, she makes Bach's heart disappear by accident. So she has kind of the same power as the other girls. This, oh, like, if you're not careful about what you think about, either your fantasies or whatever, you might accidentally, like, make something real. So Glinda does it to Amma Clutch when, she makes up the story about her forgetting things. And it could also be argued that Madam Morrible used that against her by making it happen and not Galinda. But Galinda fully thinks that she made it happen, and that's her reality that she lives in, that she killed Amma Clutch by manifesting this lie. And then it came true. But it could also be argued that Madame Morrible did it because it was her way out, but then secretly Galinda would know that she used her story against her, and she can't say anything because then she'd have to admit that she lied. Glinda also eventually charms the slippers for Nessa Rose, saying that she would like for her to find her balance. So because she has no arms, she can't, balance herself like the rest of us. She has to be propped up by Nanny or somebody that holds her from the back, and they say that she walks like a snake. So with these slippers that she got from her papa, Glinda charms them so that she can find her balance, so that she finds balance in her life. That's direct charm, not necessarily power of persuasion. But next we've got Elphaba. When she's there's a part where she's having like one of her first intellectual conversations with Glinda, and Glinda's trying to be glib, but at the same time like makes a couple snide comments that are actually pretty intelligible. And Elphaba is like whipped into a fury of excitement. Oh my god, there's a brain in this one, and through that excitement, she causes a storm to kind of manifest, this little microstorm outside of their window, and it like busts open the window, and like it flies open, and she like shrieks away, like, because she's allergic to water. And so, but later on, Amma Clutch is like, what are you talking about, dear? It's been clear all night. There was no storms. And Glinda's like, I wonder how that happened. And I think it was part of that excitement. Like, Elphaba manifested the storm by accident because she was emotionally stimulated, or intellectually. Also, we have, later on in the story, Elphaba wishes and hopes that the Scarecrow could be Fiyero. And then as in the later books, they kind of allude to that it might be some kind of like id version of him, not necessarily like the lover that she lost, but, kind of like the selfish, vain part of him. I don't know. It's that character's very nebulous. They didn't really nail it down, or he didn't. Gregory Maguire didn't really nail it down. But in the play, that's exactly what happens. She sings No Good Deed. At the very beginning, she has the Grimmery, she's sitting on the ground, Alakanaman, and she says, let his bones never break, and however they try to destroy him, let him never die, let him never die. And so, like, she's begging for some revelation to help her save her lover over this book. And in the play, we learn that it actually was Fiyero, because at the very, very end, spoiler alert, he walks over and, like, lets her know, coast is clear. And then the trap door opens, and you learn that she didn't actually melt when Dorothy threw the bucket on her. It was all a ruse. And that her and Fiyero, as the Scarecrow, can live secretly, happily ever after. And so that's the happy ending that they gave to the play, but it plays into that same concept of she turned Fiyero into the Scarecrow. She turned Bach into the Tin Man in order to save him from accidentally having his heart removed by Nessa Rose, because she was jealous and upset that he was heartless. And the Cowardly Lion was this scaredy cat that she's like, no, you're terrifying him. And she releases him into the wild and then never thinks about him again. And so he lives this life of absolute horror. You learn that in, A Lion Among Men, about how he copes with his PTSD. And later on, like when he's the Cowardly Lion in the group with Dorothy, he's like, no, you left me for dead. You did this to me. You're the reason that I'm this, little tiny whining, sniveling little scaredy cat. So a lot of the things that come to be, they almost ironically make them happen by accident. And a couple of those are mostly, so the biggest one that I kind of saved for last from the book is Elphaba's allergy to water. And so it's never explained, but you know throughout the story that when the water hits her, even when she's making love to Fiyero, the sweat of her own body stings. So there is a pain. So this is physical. This is not just in her head. It's not psychosomatic. She full on has an allergy to water, and it burns when it touches her. So she never bathes. She cleans with oil. She avoids water at all costs. When she manifested that storm, she shrieked away from the window because it brought rain into their bedroom. And Glinda had to go close and say, "Why are you freaking out so much?" So this fear of water that she's always had, I personally, it's never explained, but I personally feel like it is based on the fact that she was told that she is green as sin from the day she was born. She is ugly, dirty, rotten, unclean, like just this pure evil manifestation of her parents' sin. Could we argue that she actually is? Maybe. But the point is, she's heard nothing but your sin for the rest, like, since the day she was born. That she's green as sin. And what do you do to wash something dirty away? You clean it with water. So she's always maybe had this paranoia that water will wash her away, change who she is fundamentally. Maybe she secretly wanted that, but at the same time, she was afraid that it would remove her from existence. Maybe not physically, maybe rhetorically, but at the same time, that real fear, that paranoia of what water might do to her through her power of suggestion and persuasion, she might have convinced herself that she actually is allergic to it, and that's why it burned her. And that's why in the book, when the bucket of water is dumped on her, she is the peak of her anger and her sin and her anxiety and all of it. She is just 100% at the absolute pinnacle of her emotional heightened manic episode. And she catches fire. She touches her broom to the fire. It accidentally gets her clothes, and Dorothy wants to put her out. It's an altruistic move, but she throws the water on her, and Elphaba's paranoia of the water made her so convinced that it would hurt her that bucket of water melted her, dissolved her like a cleaning solution. It washed away her sin, and there was nothing left but the stump of a burned up broom. And so, again, this power of persuasion, she convinced herself that was real. And honestly, there's a real fundamental lesson there that we can all do that to ourselves. We always convince ourselves that our worst fear is real, and it's only until we face that fear that we can get over it. There are a couple other, magics that's happened in the play as well, that are not part of the book, but I just wanted to, the dramatic irony of it, because, I get chills when I hear it, but the music is such an integral part of that musical, aside from the story, because I know the story, but the musical and the relationships and the costumes and the visuals that I can apply, all of a sudden now they're married together in my head. So, Elphie is singing The Wizard and I, and there's two parts that she says that are prophetic. She's prophesizing the future that we already know is going to happen. That's the dramatic irony. But she says, "I'll be so happy I could melt." She's being sarcastic. But now all of a sudden, that idea is planted in her head that she'll be so happy she could melt. She also says that when people see me, they will scream, for half of Oz's favorite team. When people see me, they will scream. Again, prophetic. Not scream for joy or elation, but for fear and, horror. Nessa Rose and the heart, and then of course Elphaba, turning him into the Tin Man in order to make sure he survived. But there's, they wanted that because first of all, they had to consolidate some of the story. Nick the Chopper, you can't introduce a character that doesn't exist. They'd have to hire another actor. It's just easier to kind of pair them together, and honestly, it works for Bach. And so later on, when they sing I think it's the second part of No Good Deed, um, or For Good or Not For Good. No one mourns the wicked. It's due to her, I'm made of tin, her spell made this occur. And for once I'm glad I'm heartless. I'll be heartless killing her. And so it's this, it's adding to the thematic anxiety of the story that we're trying to be told. Separate from the book, but at the same time, the spirit of what her magic was is still part of that mythos that's continuing on into this very clean version that's not so politically heavy. Okay, I had to start over because I ran out of space on my phone. But next up we have Cumbricia. She's the original Cumbric witch. And like Saint Elphaba was represented, at least within Elphaba's character, through the totem of the looking glass. Cumbricia is represented through the Grimoire, and the Grimoire is kind of a manifestation of the past, the magic of history, the knowledge of what came before. And so when we get into the concept of what the time dragon told Elphaba about the marriage of the saint and the sacred and the wicked, or the saint and the witch. So she's going to, her destiny is to be the manifestation of the combination of the two. The saint of the future and the wickedness, the witch of the past. And she is these two archetypes merged into one, and that's kind of her destiny, her story, as it's being told through the symbolic, her personal journey, as Maguire has written her. And so with that, they talk about Cumbricia a couple times in the story. They reference her here and there, kind of as this mythological originator of sin or evil, almost biblical when Nanny tells the story of creation about the dragon that created the world, and Lurlina coming and discovering the emerald gem of Oz in the center of everything. The emergence of the Cumbric witch is representative of evil being brought into the world. Christianity's answer to the apple that was provided to Eve in the Garden of Eden. And so in a way, Oz is the Garden of Eden, and maybe Cumbricia is the snake. And, maybe Saint Elphaba, the nude woman, is Eve, and the original sin is the apple. Who knows? I'm sure that there's some tie there, but that's the theme that Gregory Maguire is going for, or at least like alluding to here. So when it comes to this, it's actually pretty interesting, because one of the key parts of the story of the Cumbric witch is there's a pass called Cumbricia's Pass, where some stuff happens and Elphaba kind of manifests a little bit of her power when she's commanding the bees to kill the cook. But it also, she recollects stories that Sarima tells to Nor about the witch and the fox cubs. And the end of that story is her going into a cave and not coming out. And then, as part of their like little bedtime story ritual, Nor would say, "And was she ever seen again?" And Sarima's response would be, "Not yet." And so that's actually a pretty interesting foreshadowing, because the final lines of the book, Wicked, after Elphaba is gone, dead, whatever you want to believe, they say, "And was she ever seen again?" And the last words, "Not yet." And so, and that's kind of how the book sends us off. It's poetic, it's interesting, but it's also, again, pointing to the fact that Elphaba is the Cumbric witch, but she is also Saint Elphaba of the Waterfall, because she's emerging with the knowledge of the past to bless the future. And we'll talk about that as well with the symbology of the mirror of the looking glass. And so we go into next, obviously, Elphaba's destiny, which we've already touched on a little bit. But it's obviously, it's made clear that the wizard, being her father, the time dragon is saying that she is now of both worlds. And there, you know, throughout the story, there are other things that kind of bring that to her attention as well. She is both of Melina and of the wizard and of both Earth and Oz. And that is what permits her, I guess, to be able to translate sort of the Grimoire, which provides her obviously power through knowledge. And she tests that knowledge and experiments, you know, with the wings on Shistory and the flying monkeys and other things of that nature. So, but with that, so she could partially read the Grimoire. Other people, it's complete gibberish to her. The wizard can read it completely. And he actually expresses that. He's like, oh, this page says about the summoning and use of dragons, or whatever it says. And she's like, wait, you can read it? He's like, yeah, it's from my world, as we said before. So, and then obviously we have the marriage of the sacred and the wicked, which is what we just talked about with this, the parallel stories of Saint Elphaba and Cumbricia. And these are combined, let's say for argument's sake that they are the same person, but two sides of story, two sides of history telling the same story, but from different points of view. So this same woman of power to one group of people telling their history, they consider her a saint. Whereas the same woman with the same powers and the same ending up in a cave and never coming out, some people consider her wicked and called her the Cumbric Witch. And so you got these two different versions of the same story. Again, tying itself to the title of the book, Wicked. And it's, you know, again, history is written by the victor. So her reputation, as it is going to go down in permanent history, is only based on who is telling it. And in this case, she's going to be wicked. She's not Galinda. Galinda's story is that she's good. But was she good? Again, her story persists based off of who's telling it. And that's, again, the story of, you know, the Cumbric Witch and Saint Elphaba. So she is the marriage of the two. She is the physical embodiment of the fact that history can remember you in either way. And then with that, let's see. Okay, so they are the same person, different stories. The book ends. Oh, and the Clock of the Time Dragon obviously is saying that the third act is not yet written. So that means that, you know, this marriage, this union of the two themes is yet to be manifest within her. And then as we go to the concluding elements of the story, we learn, you know, where she goes with that. And then I want to touch on Turtleheart's Looking Glass. So, you know, we're still talking about mythology and magic, like the mystical here. And so one of the interesting elements, and it happens early on in the book, is Turtleheart blows glass. It's one of the skills that he does to show off for Melina and also for Frex. And this looking glass he gives to Elphaba. And when Frex first comes home, he says, don't give it to her, she's going to break it. It's made of glass. And Turtleheart, presenting himself, because Frex didn't know he was there, says, I made it so it wouldn't break. And Frex is like, who are you? You know? But as they come to know him, Elphaba, she's the first person that, or he is the first person that she's comfortable with. And Frex is thinking, this is a good sign. So this is a good person. So maybe he's the answer to a couple of our problems. Also, he ends up, you know, having romantic feelings towards him, whether or not it's manifest or not. But Turtleheart makes this looking glass. It's, you know, I pictured it in my mind as like kind of like a little disc, like a thick piece of glass with colors. And he talks about like the chemical reactions that he uses to make certain colors happen and stuff like that. But he can look into it and perceive something. He even predicted that Frex was coming home and he would be home by the end of the evening. And then they go bang it out before Frex gets, you know, to the house. So his prediction did come true. And so as he starts to make these predictions based off of what he sees in glass, he also tells the story of why he left Quadling Country, and says what he saw in the glass upset him enough that he needs to go talk to the wizard. And part of that, you know, is adding to the mythos of the foreshadowing of what will happen with the three adepts, with Galinda, Elphaba, and Nessarose. But it's also something that Elphaba plays with and she's fascinated with. And she looks into it and she can see stuff, and they're like, what is she looking at? And Turtle Heart actually like admits, like says like she sees the future, and they're all like, that's really bizarre and weird. So she ends up losing it. And then as she goes into an adult, she doesn't have it. And then when the Clock of the Time Dragon does that 3-act play for her as an adult, now that she's already past the point of no return, she's killed Madam Morrible, she's had that talk with Averick about the nature of evil, and she's on her way back to Kelmako to find out that the entire royal family has been, kidnapped and murdered. So the Clock of the Time Dragon, when it says that 3rd act is not complete, it hands her this mirror, this looking glass back. And so the symbolism here is that as a child, she had the ability to perceive the unseen. And then as she lost that talent and the looking glass, she lost the ability to perceive that unseen world, or that inarticulate feeling, or the unnamed God that her father preached so strongly about. And so she loses those, and almost on a cynical level, completely speaks against it, because she only believes what she can see, and she can no longer see it because she's lost the looking glass. Symbolically, she's lost the talent to perceive that unseen. And so this is talking about children. Children have this innate ability to just intuit the world around them, and they just kind of exist, and they see things for what they are because they have no bias. They have no the guidance against it. They have no one to teach them yet that they're supposed to have that perception of one way or the other of something. So everything's an innocent perspective. And so losing that means that Elphaba has become indoctrinated with whatever bias that she inherits from her family, or from her environment, or the people around her, or the politics, or the events of her life, or nanny. And then, so as she gets that back from the Clock of the Time Dragon, this is signifying, now that they've let her know that the wizard is her father, all of a sudden her mind is unlocked. Her perception of things are really happening in the background that I have no control over, and I can't see them. Just because I can't see them doesn't mean they don't exist. Yackle, the Time Dragon, the Grimmery, the Wizard, where, all this stuff. Is he my dad? Isn't he my dad? There's a lot of evidence towards the fact that he is, and I didn't know about that, and all of a sudden my mind is blown. And this awakening that she experiences is commemorated by the Clock of the Time Dragon handing her this mirror back finally. And it's showing that she now can perceive the unseen again. Which in turn, she goes back to Kyomoko, and, her whole world is spinning around her, but her power is awakening within her. Also, as Dorothy's coming up the staircase towards the castle, she also kind of flips out. She can't really, it's really hard for her to focus. She can see but can't see, and so she actually she's like, I can't do this. Gives it to Lear. He's still a child, and asks Lear to narrate what's happening, because he still has that innocence of youth, and that unadulterated ability to see the world around him innocently, or without judgment. So that looking glass plays a huge part. It comes in at the very beginning. You don't even think about it, but there's a big old story there. And then the final one, and this is an interesting one. It was just kind of like a bonus that I threw in there, but the magic carp, or the golden carp that is rumored to live in the fish well under Kyomoko. There's apparently this underground lake that nobody knows how big it is, but it seems to be providing them with unlimited fish. So that's, the castle itself, this fortress, was originally meant to be a waterworks to divert water from the Vinkus to the Emerald City, and it ended up being abandoned and commandeered by Fiyero's father. So this story of this golden carp living down there, in my mind I'm like, what does this mean? Why is this important? Why are we focusing on this? And then when Elphaba comes back from the Clock of the Time Dragon murdering Morrible and Averick and everything, she comes back and finds Lear, and he goes, "Hey, I caught it!" And there's this golden fish right in front of them. And so I was like, what does this mean? And as I was researching, so apparently there's a book called Bless Me Ultima. I haven't read it, don't know anything about it, but from the reviews that, or from what I was reading, it says that the golden carp represents the weight of sin being the cause of the land around you to potentially sink into an unseen lake or body of water. Sound familiar? So they're sitting on this untold volume of lake under this fortress. And this house is built on sin and regret and guilt and etc. And this golden carp is finally caught at the moment that she is alleviated from her prison of guilt or let's say ignorance. And she's returning to this castle now completely reawakened to the reality around her and new potential and possibilities, and how frivolous and small it was to be so consumed by this guilt she had for sleeping with Fiyero when he was married. So this golden carp being caught by his son in his castle, and at the same time, she's learning that, the Dorothy's on her way to kill her. She's just completely unburdened by the weight of that sin that she's been wearing this entire time. And I thought that was quite poetic.